Hey guys, welcome back to episode 2 of the Padernacht Podcast, Brick by Brick. I am your host, Stephen Padernacht. I am a licensed real estate agent. I am a real estate investor. I am a real estate owner. I am a property manager. And this is the story of why I enjoy talking about real estate so much and sort of my journey through real estate. I thought it was really important for me to set up in these first couple episodes why the 4 or 5 topics that I'm discussing are being discussed. Real estate is the first one that I'm going to cover. And the reason why I'm covering that one first is because at the end of the day, I am a real estate agent by trade, but I do a lot more than that. I work in property management. I work as a developer. I work as an investor. I work as a broker, which is traditional, helping people buy and sell homes. So it's extremely important for me to discuss my experience in real estate thus far, just to kind of give some clarity for those of you who may not know me and really not know me on a personal level, why I'm so passionate about real estate. So real estate has really shaped my life and career. And I guess the best place to start would really be going back to, I'd say, 19, if I'm correct, and, my brothers and my uncle will probably, fact check me on this, but I think it goes back to 1947. And I'm going to set the scene for you from my understanding of the story. And you know how stories get passed down generation to generation. So, some version of this story probably exists that is a little bit different than mine, but it's my understanding that my grandfather and my grandmother lived in Brooklyn, and that's where my father was born, in Brooklyn. My father was also the youngest of 3 boys. He grew up in a household with his mother and father and his 2 older brothers. They lived in Brooklyn. As the story goes, to my recollection, and again, please, this is how I know the story. So my grandfather was in the barbershop, and back in those days, you went there for a shave. And there was a gentleman in there getting a shave, or a hot towel shave, and he was talking about how he was looking for a painter to paint his house. And my grandfather, who apparently was the jack of all trades, he was a musician, he was very, very, very good with his hands. He offered his services to this gentleman. Now, this gentleman ended up becoming who I know as my Uncle Bill. And the gentleman's name was Bill Kasnitz. And Bill Kasnitz was a very, very wealthy man. He hired my grandfather to paint his house. And my grandfather did such a great job that my Uncle Bill offered my grandfather the opportunity to become a superintendent of a 200-plus unit building that he was in the process of buying in the Bronx. So my grandfather, who was looking for work, I guess at that time, took the opportunity and moved his whole family from Brooklyn to the Bronx. The apartment wasn't ready yet, so there was a small office space in the front of the building that was available. So that space, my Uncle Bill offered to my grandfather, who was going to be the superintendent there, to live there with his family. That space ended up becoming my office when I got my real estate license, and I decided to get my broker's license on my own. So just full circle, the apartment that my father grew up in as a baby when he was, 1 or 2 years old, ended up becoming my office space for the first couple years of my career as a solo real estate broker. Very, very, very full circle moment to be, operating a business out of the same place where my father might have slept as a baby. Anyway, so my grandfather was the superintendent of this building. Now, this building is still standing to this day, and my father grew up there. This building was located in the Bronx, and the building today is known as the Courtyards, but in those days, it was called the Shalom Aleichem Houses. And it was 200 plus units in the Bronx on the corner of Sedgwick and Giles Place, between 238th Street and Giles Place on Sedgwick Avenue. That building my grandfather was the superintendent from 1940, I want to say 1948, all the way up until he retired, which was in the late 70s. At that point, my father took over as, I want to say he was the tenant advocate, but he also worked with the ownership. So he kind of managed the property. So that same building, that same complex was a source of income for my grandfather, for my father. And then when I got in the business, I actually managed the property for a couple of years as well. To this day, my brothers still operate an office out of that building. So I tell people that I am 3 generations in real estate. Superintendent, property manager, real estate investor, and then myself, who is an actual licensed agent. That's my legacy, sort of, or my influence into real estate and why I chose the path, just because I kind of grew up around it. I like to joke that, I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie with Joe Pesci called The Super, where he's a little boy in the beginning of the movie and his father is taking him around to go collect rents. And that was me. I mean, literally, like growing up, my dad would take me to the buildings and, we would go collect the rent. If there was a problem, we'd go there. We would, help the tenants out. It was never a surprise, to get somebody calling at, in the middle of the night with a problem, or my father to have to make sure that he got maybe a boiler guy to come out, or an electrician or a painter or whatever it may be. So I kind of grew up in the business, the property management business. But, one thing that was always front and center was also doing deals. Like anybody who knew my father knew that one of his phrases was, oh, it's a home run of a deal, right? He would always talk about a home run of a deal. And that deal was, possibly helping somebody buy or sell a home. Maybe, in his business, he didn't really help so much when it came to doing residential real estate, which I do a lot of, but it was commercial real estate. And in those days, there was no LoopNet. There was no online, cap rates. So I kind of grew up looking at income and expenses, and my father instilled in me very, very young how to value a property and how to manage a property and how to really take a property and really look at it from multiple angles. And, my background in commercial real estate really comes from, being at the dinner table and really having my dad kind of, explain to me why certain things were a good deal or why they weren't. And, I never really knew that I was learning. I really just thought that he was just kind of talking about his day. But now at 43 years old, and when I talk to other people, I'm a productivity coach in my office, and I'm the go-to guy when it comes to commercial real estate, right? Like, I realize how much of an advantage I have over your average agent. And it was because, my family comes from this business, and because I learned at such a young age how to value a property and how to look at commercial real estate. So that's kind of a background as to my family's history in real estate. So, as I said, I am a real estate broker by trade, but I want to dive into some of the other areas of real estate that I have, experience in. And, the first one I'm going to talk about is property management. Now, property management to me is a delicate relationship between the property owners and the tenants. And I feel like there needs to be an open line of communication between both parties. And if you don't have that line of communication where the tenants feel like they're getting value for paying rent every month, and the owner is making sure that his investment is covered and he's able to make money to feed his family, if those lines of communication are broken and one doesn't feel like they're getting their fair share, it can be broken very, very, very fast. So property management to me is extremely important. And it's such a, I'm trying to think of the best words to say it. Property management to me is really, it takes a certain skill set. It takes somebody who is able to compromise and able to understand that, we have to work together for a common goal. And that common goal is very simple. The owner has to make money, and the tenants have to feel that they're safe and that they're getting value for their money in rent. So my experience with property management goes way, way, way back. And it goes back to when I was a kid. And it goes back to my father teaching me how to, navigate and compromise and work with tenants and also work with property owners. I personally, in my lifetime, I've managed upwards of probably at any given time, anywhere from 50 to 250 units at one time. So, and some of those portfolios were in, Connecticut, New Jersey, Westchester County, New York City, and then specifically in New York City, Manhattan and the Bronx, Staten Island as well. So I have a very wide range of knowledge when it comes to dealing with different municipalities and different laws when it comes to property management. So that is one aspect of real estate that I think is very fruitful. And for the right person, property management can really be a successful and lucrative business. My brother is a property manager and he enjoys it and he's very good at it. Me personally, I don't necessarily enjoy managing properties for other people, and it kind of goes back to my feeling of I never really want to work for somebody. So even though the owner of the building is a client, you still have to kind of work within their parameters. So personally, I don't really do a lot of property management for other people. I usually just manage properties that I have a vested interest in. The next aspect of real estate that I want to talk about is multifamily ownership. And as I had explained earlier, owning a building is a lot different than owning a single family house. And one of the lessons that I learned early on is that you have to scale yourself when it comes to this business. And when you have a single, 2, or possibly 3 unit property, if one of those tenants decides to leave, or one of those tenants decides that they can't pay, or whatever the case may be, and you lose income from one of those tenants, it could be anywhere from a third all the way up to 100% of your income coming in from that property. And it's one of the reasons why my father always told me that you should have as much scale as possible and try to avoid the smaller properties if you can. So if you have a larger property and you have a larger building, it makes it a lot easier for you to manage, only because you don't have to worry so much. You're not so dependent on one person having to pay for the expenses that are going to come from that property. On any given day or any given month, you're going to have to worry about paying the mortgage to a bank unless the property's paid off. You're going to have to worry about paying property insurance. You're going to have to worry about paying property taxes. And then, God forbid, if something breaks down or there's some repairs that have to be done, all of those things have to be paid. And if you only have 1, 2, or 3 tenants, now you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket. So when it comes to multifamily buildings, I'm a huge advocate of helping people try to understand that it's not it's not so different than owning 1, 2, or 3 units. Now, yes, there are different nuances that you have to know, but it's very important to understand that if you have the ability to buy something that is 4, 5, 6, 7 units, it's going to make your life a lot easier than dealing with single, 2, and 3 family houses. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't get started, right? Like if you have a desire to get in real estate and you can't necessarily go buy a 4 family or a 5 family or a 6 family, whatever the case may be, then start with a single family. But just make sure you hedge your bets. You want to make sure that you're vetting your tenants before you rent to them. You want to make sure you try to have as much, keep your leverage as low as possible, and you're not necessarily over leveraged. So multifamily ownership is something that is near and dear to me, and I have a very, very wide range of experience and history dealing with. The next thing I want to talk about is real estate development. Personally, I have helped to build from ground up, I'd say probably in my career, over 75 units. And I say 75 units because I never built a single family house. I've never been a part of that, but I have been a part of an 8-unit building being built. I have been a part of a 36-unit building. I have been a part of a 7-unit building. And development, I learned very, very quickly that it's the devil's in the details. And you got to make sure that you have a very, very strong contracting team and some very, very strong subcontractors. Also, a very valuable lesson that I learned when it came to development is know the town. especially if you're dealing with, if you're outside of New York City and let's just say you pick a town, a state like New Jersey or Connecticut, all the townships are different. So make sure you speak to other developers that are in those towns and some of the nuances that those building inspectors are looking for. The inspectors in the towns could really hold you up. And I learned the hard way that if you're not doing things the way they want them done, even though it's to code, they could still make your life a living hell. So when it comes to real estate development, I urge people to make sure that they do their due diligence and you make sure that you have the ability to possibly fund the project even longer than you expect. If you think it's going to take you, 6 to 12 months to build a property, plan for 18 to 24 months just to make sure if anything goes wrong. I mean, I was in the middle of building a property, a development of 36 units. And then you know what happened to me? COVID happened right in the middle of my project. And imagine that, the world's shutting down. And then all of a sudden you've got, X amount of dollars that you help raise from other people. And now you're stuck and you can't do anything. So just make sure you plan for the worst and you have a contingency plan. When it comes to development, also, you want to make sure you have an exit strategy. You want to make sure that there's enough juice in the deal, right? So like if you're looking at let's just say you're looking at building a single family house. I'm going to give a quick breakdown on the way to look at a single family house build. You have to take the land cost. Let's say land costs you $100,000, right? Then you take your building cost. Now, usually in New York City, building cost is probably going to cost you anywhere from $250 a square foot to, depending on the finishes, right? And when I say finishes, I mean like the type of cabinets you're going to buy, the type of tiles you're going to buy, the type of paint you're going to use, what type of appliances you're going to buy. Depending on the finishes, you can go anywhere from $250 a foot all the way up to $450 a square foot. So you buy the land for $100,000. You have the ability to build, let's just say for easy sake of numbers, a 1,000 square foot home. It's going to cost you, let's just say $350 a square foot. So $350 a square foot, multiply that by 1,000 square feet. It's going to cost you $350,000 to build the property, to build the house. Now you take that, you add it to your land cost. Now you're in it for $450,000 plus any sort of carrying cost if you're getting a mortgage from a bank. But you could use $450 as a nice round number. If that property, the value of that property after it's built has to be, I'd say a good rule of thumb is probably 60%. So that $450 needs to be 60% of the value. So the value of that home should be probably in the ballpark of around, I'm just spitballing here, but probably around $700,000 to $750,000. That way you have enough room in between the value and the cost that you paid to actually make it worthwhile. And you're kind of having built-in sort of equity there when you sell the house. So that's kind of how to value a single family build. And you just take that same formula and you use it for if you're building a 10 unit, 20 unit, 30 unit, 40 unit. But yeah, property development is something that I have a vast amount of experience with. And it's really something that I learned a lot from, especially going through COVID and doing these builds that I did over the past 5 to 10 years. Productivity coaching. Productivity coaching is something that it's an endeavor that I started about 2 years ago. And it's extremely important to me because what I like to do is, my personality is that of somebody who wants to help people. And, I had mentioned in the previous episode that, it's almost to a flaw that I go back and I look to help people, even when sometimes they may not necessarily, I don't want to say they don't deserve it, but, they haven't really shown the ability to be able to reciprocate, right? So productivity coaching is something that I do as an agent. And what I do is I've been in the business for so long that I help agents who are just getting started in their business, or maybe they've been in the business for a while and they've kind of just hit a plateau. Productivity coaching is really, what I like to do is I like to say that it's just about accountability. And it's almost like the equivalent of having a personal trainer, right? Like you can go online and you could follow a diet and you could make your own diet and you could make yourself a training program. But if you don't have somebody that's going to be there to hold you accountable to your goals, then it's going to make it a lot more difficult. Not everybody is able to hold themselves accountable. So me as a productivity coach, what I like to do is I like to hold people accountable. We like to set goals. And honestly, for newer agents, it brings me great joy to see somebody close their first deal. It brings me great joy to have somebody come to me and say, hey, Steven, you know what? I want to get into real estate and I don't know where to start. Can you point me in the right direction? And then 3 months later, they're cashing a check for $10,000, $15,000 that's going to help change their lives. And then, having the ability to, there's a poem that says, or a phrase that says, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. And that's really the motto that I take when it comes to productivity coaching. The program is relatively new. It's only 2 years old, but I could tell you that I have, one client that's already closed 3 deals. I have another client that just closed 1 deal. And, there's dozens of other people out there that if they just put the effort into it and followed along, they'd be able to create real differences in their lives and other people's. But productivity coaching is something that's near and dear to me, and I take it very, very seriously, and I really hold people accountable. And I feel like if you're a new agent out there and you're really trying to get started, I'm happy to jump on a quick call with you just to kind of walk you through some basic things. We'll start with working out a schedule, right? Like the first call is always about schedule, accountability, and database. Your database is your business. And, for those of us out there that think that they don't have a database, it's very simple. Just pick up your phone and you'll see how many contacts you have in there. That is your database. Your email list. Most of us have emails that we've had for, many, many, many years. Shit, I have one email that I've had since the beginning of the internet. It's an AOL account. I never use it, but I have so many contacts in there just because I've had the same email address. That is your database. So the initial productivity coaching is going to all be about scheduling. And when I say scheduling, you have to understand that there's 2 aspects to this business. There is the job aspect and the business aspect. The business aspect is that of somebody who is setting a vision or casting a vision, right? The job aspect is actually doing the work. But guess what? You are your own boss. So you have to make sure that you're doing enough work so that way you don't have to fire yourself. I mean, at the end of the day, if you say, hey, for this business to succeed, we need to make 1,000 phone calls this year. If you're not going to make those 1,000 phone calls, then fire yourself and find somebody who will, right? It's very simple. That's the difference between the job of real estate and the business of real estate. Okay. The next aspect of productivity coaching that we talk about is, as I was mentioning, scheduling, right? You have to schedule the job and you also have to schedule the business. So everybody should have in their schedule that they're setting apart, let's just say maybe an hour a week just to kind of check in on their business and kind of see how the week went and then see if they need to pivot. But you also need to schedule time to do the job. You need to schedule time to make the calls, to follow up with people, to go out and show the houses. All of those things are extremely important, and that's what we cover during productivity coaching. The last thing I'd like to talk about when it comes to real estate is wholesaling and or fix and flips. Now, I don't really have a ton of experience when it comes to it. I mean, I have a general knowledge when it comes to wholesaling deals or flipping contracts. But the gist of it is that I learned a very, very long time ago that he who has the deal is in control. So if you're able to go out there and do what's called bird dogging, right? You might see as you're driving by, it says, we buy houses for cheap, or cheaphouses.com, or, we buy all cash. What those are wholesalers. Those people are making a living off of going out there and finding people who are possibly in a rush to sell their home and offering them less than market value. What they then do is they find an investor, or they'll find somebody that they could then flip the contract to. So let's just say I agree to buy your home for $200,000 and I tell you that I can close in the next 2 weeks. I will then go find somebody that will possibly pay me $250,000. And what I'll do is I'll sign a contract with you, and then I'll also simultaneously sign a contract with them. The contract that I sign with you must have a clause in there that allows me to assign the contract. Now, by me assigning the contract, I then assign it to the buyer, and then literally without me ever even walking into a house, I could make anywhere from $25 to $50 to $100,000 in a day just by assigning the contract. That's wholesaling. And that's another lucrative business for people. So I say all this to say, just to kind of sum up, that real estate is something that is extremely passionate, that I'm extremely passionate about. And as I go deeper and deeper into this podcast, what I want to do is I want to bring in some experts here, and I want to bring in people to help kind of bounce ideas off of and share some of the knowledge that I have in real estate, and hopefully it'll help somebody change their life. So thank you very much for listening to episode 2. And this is the Padernacht Podcast, Brick by Brick.